What makes a poem? What makes a poem popular? Why do we continue to read a poem? I guess many of us might say, well, it's all about the emotions. To me, sometimes emotions have to come with the correct themes, with an idea, with a viewpoint. And what better theme than sleep? Is there any one of us, any human being, or should I say any living creature, who does not know what sleep is? So I have chosen sleep as the theme today, and I'm going to talk about the universality of literature. Two poems by two poets written 200 years apart, and yet there is something which is common and there is something which is different. Let's see. One, the great poet William Shakespeare, and the other, well, Thomas Warton, not so well known, but let's see what he has to say about sleep. Weary with toil, I haste me to my bed. The dear repose for limbs with travel tired. But then begins a journey in my head to work my mind when body's work expires. For them my thoughts from far where I abide intend a zealous pilgrimage to thee, and keep my drooping eyelids wide open, looking on darkness which the blind do see, save that my soul's imaginary sight presents thy shadow to my sightless view, which like a jewel hung in ghastly night makes black night beauteous, and herded fancy, lo, thus by day my limbs, by night my mind, for thee and for myself no quiet find. Any guesses? Who could that poet be? Well, it is the Bard of Avon, William Shakespeare. Remember, we might know him as a playwright, but what about the 154 sonnets that he wrote? This is one of them, without a title, like all the others, called Sonnet number 27. Shakespeare says, by day, it's the body, and by night, it's the mind. Is that what sleep is all about? Can we take a jump and come to the metaphysical age? More of that later. And the poet we are looking at is Warton. What does Warton say about sleep? The poem is called Ode to Sleep. And Warton says, on this pensive pillow, gentle sleep, descend in all thy downy plumage dressed. Wipe with thy wing these eyes that wake to weep, and place thy crown of poppies on my breast. Tenses in oblivion's balm, and soothe thy throbbing pulse with intent hand. This tempest of my boiling blood be arm. Despair grows mild at thy supreme command. Yet, in vain, familiar with the gloom, and sadly toiling through the tedious night, I seek sweet slumber, while that virgin bloom, forever hovering, haunts my wretched sight. Nor would the dawning day my sorrows charm, black midnight and the blaze of noon alike to me appear, while with uplifted arm death stands prepared, but still delays to strike. What a change of mood maybe, of style maybe, of structure maybe, even though the theme is the same. The universality of poetry that I love talking about can be seen here, because sleep is something that this poet too looks forward to. But from the simple language of Shakespeare, we move into the metaphysical metaphors of this age, also called the metaphysical age. They were poets of learning, and they wanted to show off their learning, says Johnson. Well, in this poet, you can see the heightened personification. You can see the melancholy. You can see the images which come alive, the images of darkness, of unrest, of emotional exhaustion. What does this poet do? Remember, probably I haven't said it earlier, but I must say it now. He belongs to that school that we call the graveyard poets. And why graveyard? Because they love to wallow in melancholy, in sorrow, in despair. A part of the metaphysical school. And Warton also he became the poet laureate in 1785. 200 years after Shakespeare, he is writing about sleep. And what does sleep mean to him? I sometimes wonder whether this poet is talking about the poetic block that he now faces. He wants to write poetry. He has so much more to say, but something stops him from saying it. Is he looking for a kind of hope, moving away from the despair that he feels during his waking hours, that he wants to be able to write poetry? The extended metaphor that continues through the poem is something that I cannot not mention, because remember, we call these metaphors by a very strange word. We call them conceits. And pardon me if I move away from this poem to other metaphysical poets and to talk about their conceits, because they were very unlikely images that were being compared. And my favorite, the metaphor is the metaphor of the mosquito. The poet says, not this poet, but another metaphysical poet, that the mosquito is the greatest friend of lovers. Why? Because he bites me, the beloved, and then goes and bites my lover, and somehow seems to be taking that love through the blood from me, from the beloved to the lover. That was the kind of metaphors that the metaphysical poets had. But let's come back to this poem, Ode to Sleep. It's an ode because he's talking to sleep directly. And he concludes with this hope that maybe this would be a kind of revival. Remember, many poets down the ages have compared sleep to death. A temporary death, they have called it, because when we are sleeping, probably we are not aware. But both these poets don't do that. They look at sleep in different ways. And this poet is probably hoping to get inspired once again to write great poetry. Two poems, 200 years apart, two poets, two ages. It reminds me of those questions we did at school, compare and contrast. What is similar? What is different? Let me begin by saying what is similar. Both of them look forward to sleep, and sleep is so important for all of us. Theories about whether I need 6 hours or 8 hours. This is not what our poets are talking about. But remember, Warton has an ode, and Shakespeare has a sonnet. That itself brings in the difference. They look forward to sleep. He begins by calling it pensive pillow and gentle sleep. That's what Warton does. Whereas Shakespeare talks about hastening to bed. Is there something that they want to do? Is there something that they hope to achieve during this night of sleep or nights of sleep? Well, Warton talks about death in the last line of the poem. Whereas what he is doing, Shakespeare is doing, is probably looking at the possibility of this sleep doing something to him, hoping to achieve what he thinks high time. That is the blocking out of relationship. If I look at the style of the poem, the language of the poem, well, there are metaphors in both. But both cannot move away from the age. Remember, that is what literature is all about. Shakespeare lived and wrote in an age when probably the number of readers would have been limited, and we remember him more as a dramatist. But Warton, we remember him as a poet and only as a poet. So what makes it similar, I think, is the greatness of both these writers, is the idea that there are some themes that can never go out of fashion. Time, space, distance, years, personalities. But literature has something which makes them one universal whole.